So I hope everybody is doing well, and thank you for joining us from whichever city you're joining us from. And it's great to know that you keep coming back, you keep hearing us with all the events and activities that we bring to you. So a very warm welcome to you on behalf of the Anand Rathi team and from Silver Talkies. So those I see very familiar faces here today, but if you're joining us for the first time today, let me give you a quick introduction about Silver Talkies. So Silver Talkies is actually a pan-India community of older adults. We have been working with seniors, if I may call them so, seniors because they have much more experience, much more knowledge and wisdom than any one of us in the Silver Talkies team have. So we have been working with the 55 plus and older adults since 2014. And pre-pandemic, we were only Bangalore-based, but the pandemic actually took our offerings to another level. We are now virtual, and we are connected with many of you across different cities. I see Jiru joining us from Mumbai. I see people joining us from Chennai, Hyderabad, Delhi, all over India now. So that's I think the silver lining of the pandemic right now, right? So what we do is basically our idea behind Silver Talkies when I and Rishmi started out was to promote active aging as a desirable and a viable goal for seniors, because what we realized looking at our parents at home was that if they were active and they were engaged, they were healthier. And that's the philosophy that we work with, and that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. So we are a 5-member team who have been working diligently to take this mission forward. So many of you hear us on these kind of open events, which are open to both members and guests, but a large number of you have been associated with us as members also, as members of the Silver Talkies Club. So we do have a club where if you become a member, you have unlimited access to a lot of other activities where we have interest groups, we have volunteer support, we have volunteering opportunities and all host of other vocational opportunities. And we also partner with a lot of service providers to bring you special benefits. So if you would like to get more details of that, you can visit our Facebook page or write to us at connect@silvertalkies.com. And many of you may know this already, but we also have a digital magazine which is called silvertalkies.com, where our team works with experts across the spectrums from health and wellness to financial and legal advisors, nutritionists, physiotherapists, to bring to you information which is genuine, which is recent, and it is all on important issues. So do read us, do check out our website, and we do invite our members as well to write for us. So members of our club also contribute to the magazine. So we invite you and we welcome you to really upgrade your association with us and become members of Silver Talkies Club. Now, coming to today's event is brought in collaboration with Anand Rathi Wealth Limited. And I'm sure many of you have already heard the name, right? Because they have been in the business of private wealth since 2002, and they are registered with AMFI as a mutual fund distributor. So they have like 26,000 crores worth rupees of assets under management, and they have been serving 6,000 families in India and globally. So their unique platform for clients, has been recognized and has been voted as Best Customer Service Excellence Provider by the World Leadership Congress in 2020. They were also awarded the Amity Corporate Excellence Award for Most Strategic Private Wealth Management in 2019. So they have been recipient of many awards and recognitions. And today we are joined by Mr. Kedar Bhatt, who is the Associate Director at Anand Rathi Wealth Limited. Since 2007, Kedar has been instrumental in the transition of the company's evolving approach to the private wealth business. He currently oversees assets worth over rupees 400 crores for 44 families, and his domestic client base is spread across Mumbai, Vadodara, Ahmedabad, and other cities, and his international client base is in Singapore and Dubai. With over 16 years of industry experience, he has developed an in-depth understanding of the dynamic market cycles, estate planning, safety nets, and taxation, and most of which is what Kedar would be sharing with us today. So Kedar, thank you so much for joining us. and given your rich experience, I'm very sure that you would be, enriching and probably fattening our, our portfolios as well. So it's good to have you here. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Kedar, I will hand it over to you now. And Saloni, you can bring up the presentation, please.
Yeah, I believe that the last session that you all had was primarily speaking on something which is smart investment habits for people in the retirement age or over retirements. So where you got a insight in terms of what different products you guys can invest, and many different ways of how you can do a financial planning. So what I'm going to try and cover today is, say, for example, I mean, you got very different choices of cars. In the previous session, you got a product catalog of what different cars are available. I am trying to maybe just take you to which route you should be taking one of the cars to. So let's try and define the route or the path of wealth management and not speak about products today, so that there is some complementary idea to the previous session. So, Saloni, thanks for sharing the presentation. So what we see on the screen is what is wealth, what is management, objectives, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So sometimes it looks like a very easier subject to handle, saying what is wealth. To all our minds, I guess wealth is something that we have liquid, what we want to invest. What is there? What is somebody investing in mutual funds, fixed deposits? But I think to our understanding, and that's where we kind of try and differentiate ourselves, wealth is something which is a sum total of all your assets. So it's not something that where you call only bank balance or only the real estate or only the fixed deposits. What we say is that wealth is the sum total of all your assets minus the aspirational assets, which means the house that you live in, the car that you drive, etc. So what we try to do is, before we kind of get into wealth management, it's very important to start kind of try and identify the starting point. So what do we do? What do we do there is try and create a balance sheet, which could be a first guess, I mean, of what numbers come to your mind. So like a sum total of bank balance, real estate, mutual funds, fixed deposits, if I mean in own name, in family members' name. So there are many different ways to define this. And what you see on the screen is nothing but a collation of all these numbers. Balance sheet. So there are different ways of wealth management. What we've experienced in the industry is that usually people call on to their advisors, or when they meet their bank relationship managers, they talk about the liquidity that they hold in their bank balances. And ideally, the discussion is always revolving around what kind of liquidity I have and what investments can I make. uh, where we beg to differ a bit, we feel that what is wealth is, first of all, we need to take a total, like I said, the breakup of all these assets together, and then maybe traverse the path. Then maybe look at how I can try and look at wealth management. So next slide. So uh, just stay there. Yeah. So what we say, management, I mean, management is a very simpler word, but I think when it comes to wealth management, if we are not going to define it in the same way of how you manage the other things, why should it be different? When it comes to wealth management, the idea has to be the same. So if I have to ask you that, is it possible to manage a business without fixing the profit objective for the year? Or let's take an example, does a team get into the game of cricket without having a target fixed in the dressing room? So at various points in time, I feel that defining objectives is the most important job before we get into any kind of wealth management, or maybe looking at investments into different products. So I want to be an effective CEO where I, without agreeing to profit targets, I don't want to onboard any of my directors. So it's like, I mean, I have an objective in mind, is and only when I would want to move forward. So if I have a certain objective in place, then is only when I can sit down with the advisor or kind of with my family members to decide a strategy around it. If I have a certain number target, is only when I will build a plan to it. If I'm building a plan, then I will also build a contingency. What do I mean by contingency? That not all plans work. So I need to have a plan B or a fallback option. Now, all this comes as a part of deciding the strategy. So defining your objective could be return based, could be in different segments of how we can try and kind of address that. So the third one is implementing the strategy of how easier it is to implement what we planned, because most of the plans, they just remain on the drawing board. So how kind of effective it is to implement, or how easier it is to implement. And the last one is to monitor the direction. So I believe that unless and until we have all these 4 steps under wealth management charted out and practiced, we are actually not doing a thorough wealth management job, or any kind of management is not complete without defining objective, deciding strategy, implementing the strategy, and monitoring the direction. Saloni, please move. Now coming to a direction, like I mentioned that you all have had an insight in terms of what products do you have to invest, or what are the options available to an Indian investor or an NRI based out of the country, but what investment options does he have of investing in India? So before we get into products or what you have heard in the previous session, let's define these objectives and let's come to concrete numbers. So how do we define objectives? Now, to our minds, we went through different iterations, and from our own client families, we had this learning. So we manage roughly around 5,000 client families in India and abroad. And through various interactions at different points in time in the last 18-20 years, we figured out that the first and primemost objective of managing wealth is to try and see that we beat inflation. So what do we mean by inflation is, again, I'm making it simpler, saying I am holding my purchasing power. So if I were to save my monies today, my money should be good for me to actually consume any kind of expenditures that I want to do in future after 5 years or 10 years. So to us, the subject of investment is nothing but deferred consumption. Whenever we are investing it for a certain need in future. We might utilize this amount in future. So what do I do actually if I'm going to invest my monies today for a certain need in future? I need to see to it that at least my purchasing power is maintained. And how do I define that? So earning at a rate of return that surpasses the inflation. So what it defines is that the inflation for the client families that we manage, or the client families who we are right now at this group level, 2% of the overall India's population fall into this segment, which does not actually marry the inflation numbers that the government releases. Slightly different. Let me explain to you. So the government of India declares a certain inflation number every month or every quarter, and they talk about this number, which is relevant to 98% of the population. Why do I mean this? Because this inflation is calculated for the families where their 50% of the income is spent on food, 25% of their income is spent on fuel in terms of traveling. So fortunately, we all don't fall in that segment, and hence the number of the government inflation data is actually not relevant to us. So I'll come to that later on of what is the number which is relevant to us. But what do we mean is that defining an objective, we need to try and surpass the purchasing power percentage. So that's where we define a number saying that this should be my investment return target. Now we cover 3 important objectives at Anand Rathi when it comes as a subject of wealth management. First is defining an objective. Second is protection. So safety nets, creating a liability-free asset to safeguard against external risk. I mean, what is the point? What is the purpose of money if it is not available when I need the most? So there has to be enough safety net in and around the investments that I've done. So that covers the part of protection. There are means and ways of how we can do it. I'll come to that later on as a part of the presentation. The third one is estate planning. Very important subject, but highly neglected. So we end up speaking to families with investments of 1 crores, 2 crores, 5 crores, 10 crores, and there is no transmission plan. There is nothing where it is clearly laid out that how will these assets they get transferred to the next generation. And it becomes a very, very important topic, but there is no plan for it. So we believe that unless and until we don't have a proper protection and transmission plan, there is not enough wealth management that is being done. We cannot just focus in terms of returns. We also have to focus of how will we protect and how will we transfer these assets to the next generation. So India as a country, I'm sure every one of you believes in this, that we don't believe in spending out the entire monies that we have in our lifetime. I end up speaking to people even in the age group of 70s and 80s, where they have a clear plan saying that this is what I want to transfer to the next generation. This is I want to bequeath. So this is where the thought process comes in, that we don't want to consume our entire wealth in our lifetime, and we will continue to focus in terms of savings. So that's where we differentiate as Indian investors to what do we kind of look at the European or the US families, where they try and spend out everything that they have in their lifetime and there is nothing left for the next generation. So I need to see to it that I have a proper laid out estate plan. I have a proper will in place, which is registered. I have proper nominations. We come across so many articles that talk about a few thousand crores lying in fixed deposits, in life insurance policies, where the family is not aware that this is what they've inherited. And the monies just lie around without any legal heir going to claim that. So we don't want a situation like this for our client families, and hence we try to focus on estate planning very strongly. Saloni, go forward. Yeah. So like I was explaining to you, the inflation over last 30 years. Now, inflation over last 30 years as defined by the government has been an average of somewhere between 6 to 7%. And the Anand Rathi estimate, the kind of expenditures that usually client families that we cater to, or the 2% of the population, which falls in the bracket where the inflation is 10%. So we've picked up some data from 1990 and 91 saying if your families are spending on international travel, spending on purchasing properties in India or abroad, or sending kids for higher education to the best of the universities in India or outside India, spending on investments in gold jewelry or some precious stones and various things like this. If we have to focus on to expenditures like this from 1991, the average inflation onto all these kind of expenditures, yeah, I missed out on philanthropy, which also forms a very large part of the spending. The inflation comes around 10%. So if you look at the healthcare charges way back in 1990, or what we used to end up paying for a life insurance policy or a medical insurance policy or a hospital bed, what it would cost at and what it is costing now, the inflation number has been 10%. So what do we mean by this is that the first objective of what my return target should be, I should be at least earning over and above 10%. Now, how much is possible with what kind of risk is something that I'll take you forward. But the idea is to try and earn at least minimum 10% and above to maintain my purchasing power, and to kind of highlight and throw you some numbers. A value of 10 crore in 30 years, if I kind of grow at 7%, what the government inflation number looks comes to 76 crores. And if I were to grow at this at 10% per annum, the number would come to, in 30 years, 174 crores. So optically, when I compare 7% and 10%, it might not really look so big. I mean, what's the difference between 7 and 10 on a percentage scale? But that compounded over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and where our investments will actually pan out to be, the number differential will turn out to be huge. So the whole purpose of investment will be actually not met if my return target is so closer to 7, and if I am not trying to target my purchasing power, which is 10 and above. That's what we are just trying to kind of conclude here. Saloni, please move forward. Now, coming to some very important aspects that in terms of asset allocation, I mean, how do we try and cater to the needs of wealth management? So we feel that a discussion on wealth management cannot happen straight onto products. We need to try and define the asset allocation first before we get into any kind of product discussions or return targets. Now, we've kind of based this theory onto some kind of research that was done back in the US. And we've tried putting this as saying that Anand Rathi estimate of time spent. We've just created 3 columns. Anand Rathi estimate of time spent, the investment decisions, and the impact of returns. Now, what do we mean by this is that usually when you speak to people, they would be spending most of the time, that is 93% of the times, actually in terms of market timing and security selection. So, whereas the return differential will be happening, the maximum impact will be coming from asset allocation, where people have only ended up spending time of 10%. Giving you an example, say 5 years back, somebody had extra liquidity and wanted to invest, and they thought of investing into any kind of real estate, residential or commercial, in any parts of the country. In India, could be in Bangalore, could be in Delhi, could be in Bombay. And he or she must have spent a lot of time thinking that which is the developer I should be investing in, what is the rate that should I be investing into. But if you have to look back in the last 5-7 years and see where the real estate investments have moved, the returns have been very, very low. The reason for that is that we spent a large amount of time in deciding the security selection and the market timing. But I didn't spend too much time in deciding which asset that I should be investing in. Now, the question comes, which are the 4 different kind of assets that we have for Indian investors? First is equity. The second is the most favorite, which is real estate, physical investments, physical tangible assets. The third is commodities, that is gold and silver. The last one is debt, which is fixed deposits, PPF, any tax-free bonds. So these are the only 4 largely asset classes that are available to an Indian investor. Now, if I had spent time in deciding that which is the asset that I would want to invest 5 years back, and we would have come at a judgment saying that the real estate as an asset class does not look favorable, then maybe I would have, everybody is wiser in the hindsight, but maybe if I can do this for the next 5 years and see that which is the asset class that is possibly looking more promising to an Indian investor and spend enough amount of time there, then what the data shows is that the 93% of impact on my returns will come from here. So asset allocation becomes very, very important. Going by the product selection approach might lead us to some kind of disappointments in future. So we are just trying to judge a book by its cover. We just go by looking at the products, and we look at possibly investing whether this would be a good product or a bad product. But there has to be a more important amount of time being spent on what kind of asset allocation should I have on my portfolio. Saloni, please move. Now, through an example, I'm just trying to kind of showcase that why is asset allocation so important. And I'm sure everybody of you would have started investing in your early ages. And if we were to look at a time period of investments, Saloni, if you can just highlight what's mentioned there at the bottom of the screen, the return investments from Jan 1990 and actual returns that up till 31st March 21. So what we are trying to say is, if at all somebody must have started investing back in 1990 into different asset classes that were available to an Indian investor, what it could be fixed deposits, it could be gold, it could be real estate, it could be in equity markets, or say we have a comparison of the most favorite and understood product, which is mutual funds. So if somebody must have made investment and 1 crore would have got invested back in 1990, what each kind of asset allocation or each of these asset class have paid out over the last 30 years. So a fixed deposit, say considering a State Bank of India rate of fixed deposit, which has grown at 7% per annum on an average from 1991. Investments into gold, 9% per annum is the rate of growth since 1990. So your 1 crore would have become 15 crores. So usually people, when they invest into real estate, they always try to like to talk in multiples. They don't talk in terms of percentages. I have an ancestral property, which has actually was gifted to be my grandfather, which was valued at 1 crore, giving you an example, back in 1990, is valued at 20 crores today, is valued at 25 crores today. But what does it mean when we say that it is valued at 20 crores and 25 crores today? We need to see to it that what is the per annum return? Because when it comes to financial instruments, we like to compare it in terms of fixed deposits. What is the per annum return? So when it comes to real estate, we also have to have it the same yardstick of either value or percentages of where it is valued at today. So yes, I mean, 1 crore, when we actually say that it's grown on to become 24 crores, seems like a very huge number. But if I have to break it down and see what is the per annum return, then it is only between 10 and 11. Most of my clients, they get surprised when they look at these numbers saying that, oh, it's just 10 and 11%. I thought it could have been really high. So what we are trying to just show here is that each asset class growing at a different rate in a differential of 30 years. The real estate grew at 11% average. The 1 crore became 24 crores. And if you were invested into the equity markets, the best known index is Sensex or Nifty, that has actually compounded at 14% per annum. And that 1 crore has become 60 crores today. So you see the differential between 24 and 60, which is huge and which I wouldn't have been able to kind of define because I didn't know exactly the differential between 11% and 14%, what it would throw off for the last 30 years. Now coming to mutual funds, it's a very different story. Every mutual fund that possibly got listed in 1995, we've not just tried picking up the best performing ones. We've just picked up the funds which were available to an Indian investor back in 1995 when they listed 93. So these were the funds that you might remember. These names like HDFC Flexi Cap Fund, Birla Sun Life 95 Fund, Franklin India Blue Chip Fund, they all got launched back in 93 and 95. 1 crore invested, you won't believe what it is valued at today. 1 crore invested is 400 crores, 410 crores, and the highest is 692 crores if we stayed invested in a fund called Reliance Growth Fund, which got launched in 1995. So can you now compare a differential in terms of different asset classes, what they can throw up? So these mutual funds, they compounded at a rate of 23% and 21%, respectively. And the number is unimaginable. I mean, this 1 crore is 692 and come at a number like 1 lakh. 1 lakh invested in 1995 into Reliance Growth could be valued at 6 crore 92 lakhs today. So it's an eye opener for us. So hence, focusing on what kind of asset class I'm going to invest in becomes really important.
Kedar, there is a question where somebody has asked me if these returns which are highlighted here, are these pre-tax or post-tax?
No, these returns are pre-tax.
Pre-tax.
So these returns are not post-tax. So post-tax could be very different for each individual in the kind of income bracket someone falls in. These are pre-tax numbers.
Yeah.
But again, equity has an advantage, like we all know. Up to 2018, there were no taxes in equity. Any investments that were done in equity or equity related instruments or mutual funds, after a year of holding, they were all tax free. There is only a tax introduced back in 2018. So anybody who earned this 21, 23% right from 91 or 93, 95 has gone all tax free up to 2018. Whereas we always had tax when it came to fixed deposits, gold, or any kind of physical assets. We can maybe address this a little more in detail during the Q&A.
Sure.
Yeah, Saloni, please, next. So just kind of trying to show an impact of asset allocation. Why am I spending so much time on asset allocation is because it really tries to bring in the difference on the returns of your portfolio. So like I'm just being repetitive again, I can decide which products I want to invest in without having a proper asset allocation plan. But the future could be uncertain. The chances of disappointments could be higher. And if I were to actually do an asset allocation plan with regards to what the next 4 or 5 years hold for an investor in India, I might try to kind of be better than possibly doing a random product selection process. So what you're seeing in front of the screen is that a portfolio one, somebody, an investor who had maximum money is invested into fixed deposits and real estate, and a very limited amount in gold since 1990 has earned 9.34% as the growth rate of the portfolio. The portfolio as a total has grew by 9.34%. Now, this slightly changes when I introduce 10% exposure into mutual funds. From 1990, say that person reluctantly, by the pressure of some friends, peers, or family members, went on to invest something in mutual funds. And today, the rate of return on this kind of a portfolio, where he just let out 10% of the overall portfolio into mutual funds, has significantly improved by almost 4.5% per annum. Per annum, it's created a difference of 4.5% from 9.34 as an average. The person has a rate of return of 13.83%. The same thing when it comes to that 10% allocated to the best performing mutual funds. I mean, I just took a chance in the previous case saying that I just invested into mutual funds without even checking. Possibly they could be the least performing mutual funds. Still, it could bring me a difference of 4.5%. If I were to take the best of the performing mutual funds by the help of some good advisors, if I would have done that back in 1990, then my returns would have really gone up by almost 5.5%. So you can see only 10% allocation going as an asset class to equities has brought 5.5% per annum differential, which means that on an investment of 1 crore, 5.5 lakh rupees every year, and compounded that for 30 years, you can just imagine the number it would run to. Saloni, the next slide, please. Yeah. Now looking at a very, very smart investor who possibly made a lot of money by investing 30% of his portfolio into equities. The previous cases that we saw were having a 10% allocation to equities. If somebody from 1990 had a very strong conviction and would have invested in any form, could be the blue chip companies, could be the index itself, could be the mutual funds, we are considering an investor in mutual funds because that's the most easiest to take. You might find it difficult identifying stocks or which companies do I invest into. But if I have to invest in the best performing mutual funds and 30% of my portfolio out of 1 crore went into this, my returns per annum would have shot up to 18.31% per annum. To what the first portfolio looked like 9.34%, I am almost doubling up my wealth with a clause like this. So the current value would have stood at 1 crore 86 lakhs. A 1 lakh invested into these different asset classes is valued at 1 crore 86 lakhs today. So it is huge. So again, showing you just the impact of asset allocation and the right amount of monies which should go into what asset class. Saloni, yeah, please, next. Yeah, coming to the second most important principle. The first was asset allocation, and I gave you a lot of insights on what possibly the past has kind of turned out to be. The important part is that when you talk about higher returns or when you talk about money management, we can speak about the expected returns, or we can speak about what kind of return targets I want to have on the portfolio. But the most important animal here is risk management. So what I always end up telling my clients is that we can all end up spending a lot of time deciding the maths, saying what is the kind of return I want to target on the portfolio. Could be 10%, 12%, 14%. I'm talking about numbers only above the purchasing power, which I told you the inflation numbers, over and above 10%. But when it comes to risk management, we always kind of handle it with a lot of English. We say that this is low risk, medium risk, and high risk. Now, if we were to define our returns when it comes to an expected return saying 10, 12, and 14, why is risk not defined as a number? So at Anand Rathi, what we sincerely feel is that if at all we are not going to define the risk as a number, there will be never a clarity in terms of what is the kind of probability of this portfolio generating a certain return. So what is risk? Risk is nothing but simply defining the deviation from an expected outcome. I wanted to reach a certain place in an hour's time. I was driving down, I got late by 10 minutes, or I got late by 30 minutes, or to my surprise, I reached 15 minutes earlier. So what is this deviation on the time is nothing but actually a standard deviation that we calculate. So when it comes to returns, if I am to target 14%, what is the deviation that I'm going to have on this number? Will it be +5? Will it be -5? We should be defining this number. We should not be calling risk as low, medium, and high. Saloni, next, please. Yeah. So what would be an ideal portfolio of expected return and risk? We are just trying to put our thoughts together on this page, saying that the expected return potential should be 14% per annum plus. This is something that we try and actually look at for our clients. The skewness should be 50-50, which means that most of the times my experiences should be closer to the mean, should be closer to 14. It cannot be higher than the average. It cannot be lower than the average. I'm sure none of the investors will complain if it will be higher than the average. It will be higher than 14. But when you end up having periods where it is higher than 14, there also will be periods when the pendulum will swing more towards the negative side. So there could be possibly a lower negative return as well. So why we are taking these logics is saying that 14% returns will meet my aspirations, because the overall investment objective is, like, as I told you, is deferred consumption. My money should be available to me in the future, and hence it should meet my aspirations. Skewness of 50-50, which means that the closer I stay to the average, I will be able to apply a certain rule of statistics. So Anand Rathi model of wealth management believes in a mathematical construct of the portfolio. So we will spend some time with each one of y'all, if at all y'all want to dwell deeper in understanding this model. It is based on a certain mathematical construct or a calculation saying that, can I apply a rule of statistics, which is 68, 95, and 99, to kind of develop probable outcomes. I mean, when I'm actually investing, it's like tossing a coin. Return and risk are opposite sides of a coin. Now, every time I toss it, it could be heads, it could be tails. So I need to see to it that what is the number of times will I get returns closer to my objectives? What is the time of returns that it will be lower than my objectives? So when I'm defining a certain number on risk, we define it as a 7%. So if I have to try and target 14%, the standard deviation, which I just mentioned in the previous slide, the number to the risk, and not talking about English, saying low, medium, and high, the number to risk should be 7%. Now, why am I taking 7% is because the risk-free rate in India, what people say is that this is the bare minimum that I want, Kedar. Whenever I'm investing, I at least need the fixed deposit return coming from my portfolio. Over and above whatever you can try and achieve, I'm good with it. So if it becomes so important for me to achieve 7% or 6%, whatever the fixed deposit return is prevailing, I need to see to it that while I'm trying to target 14, in most cases, I should not be falling lower than 6 or 7. So when I'm going by this certain mathematical construct of the portfolio, 84% of the times, this portfolio will give you a return equal or higher than fixed deposits. And the prime most question for most investors when they come to equities, how much is my capital safe? So going by a certain mathematical construct which we practice, 97% of the times you will not be losing your capital. So 84% of the times you will be making monies more than the fixed deposits, and 97% of the times the risk of not losing capital is always given. So this is a certain model portfolio which we follow. We can build in, just to give you an example, we can build in more level of probabilities, more level of safety by trying to reduce the target return. The target return on this page is 14%. If we try and target 12, if we try and target 10, the probability of losing capital could almost be higher, almost to 99. So there are ways and means of how we can tweak these numbers. Yeah, Saloni, next please. Well, I spoke a lot on the returns and quickly need to cover the protection and the transmission part, which I explained to you right at the beginning. That are we doing enough to safeguard our wealth? So in unforeseen situations, we don't know whether what kind of liability that we would attract. It could be business risk, it could be professional risk, it could be family disputes. In which cases the wealth goes into a very, very tedious, lengthy process where I cannot really get to use my monies when I need them. So there are safety nets and there are instruments of how you can try and actually safeguard these unseen liabilities which might come around to me in future. Kind of quickly, I might just give you one or two example when it comes to liabilities. Say people, I mean, just they say that we have retired. We are not in the phase that we are actually running a business or we are exposed to any level of risk. So I usually end up giving them an example saying that what could be possibly different level of risk. So somebody who has run a business in the past, or somebody was at a very, very controlling position in a company and has retired now. But there could be a situation where an individual who was in a key managerial director level of an organization, in case of a default later on, can be held responsible. For an individual who is running a business, personal guarantees, if they were invoked, could lead to assets being attached. For someone renting out a property, in event of an act of God, liabilities can be passed on to the owners as well. So we need to really see to it. It's an important subject to just understand. It's not really must have, but it is nice to have a protection in and around my wealth if my situation demands so. Saloni, next slide, please. Yeah. So coming to, the previous slide, please. Yeah. Now coming to the transmission part, like I was just mentioning that all of the physical life, which is finite, there will be some loss or hassle in transmission of this wealth to the next generation. And this is only a reason because of the bad estate planning, where we try to just make out of the enemies of the siblings who are left around. But the idea was that it was not planned. The inheritance was not planned well, and hence there are legal disputes which the person has to go through. Like I mentioned earlier, there are like 30,000 crores lying unclaimed in banks, insurance policies, mutual funds, and even in EPF accounts. So many of these families which go into disarray when they lose someone, their children, they might be unaware of all these investments, and this money could remain unclaimed forever. So the advantage of doing wealth management in this manner is something that we are not only trying to address objectives, but we are also trying to address the protection and the transmission part. So mitigating reintroduction of estate duties in India, or helping continuity of efficient management of wealth and avoiding family disputes, estate planning becomes a very, very imperative subject. Next, please.